Consider two athletes who both want to play in college. One says she has to work very hard and the other uses goal setting to create a plan to stay on track and work on specific skills where she is lacking. Both are working hard, but only the latter is working smart. It can be frustrating for athletes to work extremely hard but not make the progress they wanted. What can make the difference is drive, utilizing the mental gear to maximize gains made in the technical and physical areas. Drive provides direction, goals, sustains effort, motivation, and creates a training mindset that goes beyond simply working hard. Drive applies direct force on your physical and technical gears, strengthening and polishing them so they can spin with vigor and purpose. While desire might make you spin those gears faster and harder as you work out or practice, drive is what built them in the first place. Our view of the world is not given to us from the outside in a pure, objective form. It is shaped by our mental abilities, our shared cultural perspectives, and our unique values and beliefs. This is not to say that there is no reality outside our minds or that the world is just an illusion. It is to say that our version of reality is precisely that, our version, not the version. There is no single, universal, or authoritative version that makes sense, other than as a theoretical construct. We can see the world only as it appears to us, not as it truly is, because there is no as it truly is without a perspective to give it form. Philosopher Thomas Nagel argued that there is no view from nowhere, since we cannot see the world except from a particular perspective, and that perspective influences what we see. We can experience the world only through the human lenses that make it intelligible to us. Often overlooked, but just as important a stakeholder, is the consumer, who plays a large role in the notion of the privacy paradox. Consumer engagement levels in all manner of digital experiences and communities have simply exploded, and they show little or no signs of slowing. There is an awareness among consumers, not only that their personal data helps to drive the rich experiences that these companies provide, but also that sharing this data is the price you pay for these experiences, in whole or in part. Without a better understanding of the what, when, and why of data collection and use, the consumer is often left feeling vulnerable and conflicted. I love this restaurant finder app on my phone, but what happens to my data if I press OK when asked if that app can use my current location? Armed with tools that can provide them options, the consumer moves from passive bystander to active participant. Considerable work by cultural psychologists and anthropologists has shown that there are indeed large and sometimes surprising differences in the words and concepts that different cultures have for describing emotions, as well as in the social circumstances that draw out the expression of particular emotions. However, those data do not actually show that different cultures have different emotions, if we think of emotions as central, neurally implemented states. As for, say, color vision, they just say that, despite the same internal processing architecture, how we interpret, categorize, and name emotions varies according to culture, and that we learn in a particular culture the social context in which it is appropriate to express emotions. However, the emotional states themselves are likely to be quite invariant across cultures. In a sense, we can think of a basic, culturally universal emotion set that is shaped by evolution and implemented in the brain, but the links between such emotional states and stimuli, behavior, and other cognitive states are plastic and can be modified by learning in a specific cultural context. The approach, Joint Cognitive Systems, treats a robot as part of a human-machine team where the intelligence is synergistic, arising from the contributions of each agent. The team consists of at least one robot and one human and is often called a mixed team because it is a mixture of human and robot agents. Self-driving cars, where a person turns on and off the driving, is an example of a joint cognitive system. Entertainment robots are examples of mixed teams, as are robots for telecommuting. The design process concentrates on how the agents will cooperate and coordinate with each other to accomplish the team goals. Rather than treating robots as peer agents with their own completely independent agenda, joint cognitive systems approaches treat robots as helpers such as service animals or sheepdogs. In joint cognitive system designs, artificial intelligence is used along with human-robot interaction principles to create robots that can be intelligent enough to be good team members. William Buckland, 1784 to 1856, was well known as one of the greatest geologists in his time. His birthplace, Axminster in Britain, was rich with fossils, and as a child, he naturally became interested in fossils while collecting them. In 1801, Buckland won a scholarship and was admitted to Corpus Christi College, Oxford. He developed his scientific knowledge there while attending John Kidd's lectures on mineralogy and chemistry. After Kidd resigned his position, Buckland was appointed his successor at the college. Buckland used representative samples and large-scale geological maps in his lectures, which made his lectures more lively. In 1824, he announced the discovery of the bones of a giant creature, and he named it Megalosaurus, or Great Lizard. He won the prize from the Geological Society due to his achievements in geology. Ecosystems differ in composition and extent. They can be defined as ranging from the communities and interactions of organisms in your mouth or those in the canopy of a rainforest to all those in Earth's oceans. The processes too governing them differ in complexity and speed. There are systems that turn over in minutes, and there are others through which rhythmic time extends to hundreds of years. Some ecosystems are extensive, biomes, such as the African savanna. Some cover regions, river basins. Many involve clusters of villages, micro-watersheds. Others are confined to the level of a single village, the village pond. In each example there is an element of indivisibility. Divide an ecosystem into parts by creating barriers, and the sum of the productivity of the parts will typically be found to be lower than the productivity of the whole, other things being equal. The mobility of biological populations as a reason. Safe passages, for example, enable migratory species to survive. In recent years, urban transport professionals globally have largely acquiesced to the view that automobile demand in cities needs to be managed rather than accommodated. Rising incomes inevitably lead to increases in motorization. Even without the imperative of climate change, the physical constraints of densely inhabited cities and the corresponding demands of accessibility, mobility, safety, air pollution, and urban livability all limit the option of expanding road networks purely to accommodate this rising demand. As a result, as cities develop and their residents become more prosperous, persuading people to choose not to use cars becomes an increasingly key focus of city managers and planners. Improving the quality of three alternative options, such as walking, cycling, and public transport, is a central element of this strategy. However, the most direct approach to accommodating automobile demand is making motorized travel more expensive or restricting it with administrative rules. The contribution of motorized travel to climate change reinforces this imperative. Young contemporary artists who employ digital technologies in their practice rarely make reference to computers. For example, Wade Guyton, an abstractionist who uses a word processing program and inkjet printers, does not call himself a computer artist. Moreover, some critics, who admire his work, are little concerned about his extensive use of computers in the art-making process. This is a marked contrast from 3 decades ago when artists who utilized computers were labeled by critics, often disapprovingly, as computer artists. For the present generation of artists, the computer, or more appropriately, the laptop, is one in a collection of integrated, portable digital technologies that link their social and working life. With tablets and cell phones surpassing personal computers in internet usage, and as slim digital devices resemble nothing like the room-sized mainframes and bulky desktop computers of previous decades, it now appears that the computer artist is finally extinct. The critic who wants to write about literature from a formalist perspective must first be a close and careful reader who examines all the elements of a text individually and questions how they come together to create a work of art. Such a reader, who respects the autonomy of a work, achieves an understanding of it by looking inside it, not outside it or beyond it. Instead of examining historical periods, author biographies, or literary styles, for example, he or she will approach a text with the assumption that it is a self-contained entity and that he or she is looking for the governing principles that allow the text to reveal itself. For example, the correspondences between the characters in James Joyce's short story, Araby, and the people he knew personally may be interesting, but for the formalist they are less relevant to understanding how the story creates meaning than are other kinds of information that the story contains within itself. Manufacturers design their innovation processes around the way they think the process works. The vast majority of manufacturers still think that product development and service development are always done by manufacturers, and that their job is always to find a need and fill it rather than to sometimes find and commercialize an innovation that lead users have already developed. Accordingly, manufacturers have set up market research departments to explore the needs of users in the target market, product development groups to think up suitable products to address those needs, and so forth. The needs and prototype solutions of lead users, if encountered at all, are typically rejected as outliers of no interest. Indeed, when lead users' innovations do enter a firm's product line, and they have been shown to be the actual source of many major innovations for many firms, they typically arrive with a lag and by an unusual and unsystematic route. Development can get very complicated and fanciful. A fugue by Johann Sebastian Bach illustrates how far this process could go, when a single melodic line, sometimes just a handful of notes, was all that the composer needed to create a brilliant work containing lots of intricate development within a coherent structure. Ludwig van Beethoven's famous Fifth Symphony provides an exceptional example of how much mileage a classical composer can get out of a few notes and a simple rhythmic tapping. The opening da-da-da-dum that everyone has heard somewhere or another appears in an incredible variety of ways throughout not only the opening movement, but the remaining three movements, like a kind of motto or a connective thread. Just as we don't always see the intricate brushwork that goes into the creation of a painting, we may not always notice how Beethoven keeps finding fresh uses for his motto or how he develops his material into a large, cohesive statement. But a lot of the enjoyment we get from that mighty symphony stems from the inventiveness behind it, the impressive development of musical ideas. The animal in a conflict between attacking a rival and fleeing may initially not have sufficient information to enable it to make a decision straight away. 1. If the rival is likely to win the fight, then the optimal decision would be to give up immediately and not risk getting injured. 2. But if the rival is weak and easily defeatable, then there could be considerable benefit in going ahead and obtaining the territory, females, food or whatever is at stake. 3. Animals under normal circumstances maintain a very constant body weight and they eat and drink enough for their needs at regular intervals. 4. By taking a little extra time to collect information about the opponent, the animal is more likely to reach a decision that maximizes its chances of winning than if it takes a decision without such information. 5. Many signals are now seen as having this information gathering or assessment function, directly contributing to the mechanism of the decision-making process by supplying vital information about the likely outcomes of the various options. The fossil record provides evidence of evolution. The story the fossils tell is one of change. Creatures existed in the past that are no longer with us. Sequential changes are found in many fossils showing the change of certain features over time from a common ancestor, as in the case of the horse. Apart from demonstrating that evolution did occur, the fossil record also provides tests of the predictions made from evolutionary theory. For example, the theory predicts that single-celled organisms evolved before multi-celled organisms. The fossil record supports this prediction. Multi-celled organisms are found in layers of Earth millions of years after the first appearance of single-celled organisms. Note that the possibility always remains that the opposite could be found. If multi-celled organisms were indeed found to have evolved before single-celled organisms, then the theory of evolution would be rejected. A good scientific theory always allows for the possibility of rejection. The fact that we have not found such a case in countless examinations of the fossil record strengthens the case for evolutionary theory. In economics, there is a principle known as the sunk cost fallacy. The idea is that when you are invested and have ownership in something, you overvalue that thing. This leads people to continue on paths or pursuits that should clearly be abandoned. For example, people often remain in terrible relationships simply because they've invested a great deal of themselves into them. Or someone may continue pouring money into a business that is clearly a bad idea in the market. Sometimes, the smartest thing a person can do is quit. Although this is true, it has also become a tired and played-out argument. Sunk cost doesn't always have to be a bad thing. Actually, you can leverage this human tendency to your benefit. Like someone invests a great deal of money in a personal trainer to ensure they follow through on their commitment, you, too, can invest a great deal up front to ensure you stay on the path you want to be on. Also, it has become difficult for companies to develop new pesticides, even those that can have major beneficial effects and few negative effects. Simply maintaining yields at current levels often requires new cultivars and management methods, since pests and diseases continue to evolve, and aspects of the chemical, physical, and social environment can change over several decades. 1. In the 1960s, many people considered pesticides to be mainly beneficial to mankind. 2. Developing new, broadly effective, and persistent pesticides often was considered to be the best way to control pests on crop plants. 3. Since that time, it has become apparent that broadly effective pesticides can have harmful effects on beneficial insects, which can negate their effects in controlling pests, and that persistent pesticides can damage non-target organisms in the ecosystem, such as birds and people. 4. Very high costs are involved in following all of the procedures needed to gain government approval for new pesticides. 5. Consequently, more consideration is being given to other ways to manage pests, such as incorporating greater resistance to pests into cultivars by breeding and using other biological control methods. This makes sense from perspective of information reliability. The dynamics of collective detection have an interesting feature. Which cues do individuals use as evidence of predator attack? In some cases, when an individual detects a predator, its best response is to seek shelter. 1. Departure from the group may signal danger to non-vigilant animals and cause what appears to be a coordinated flushing of prey from the area. 2. Studies on dark-eyed juncos, a type of bird, support the view that non-vigilant animals attend to departures of individual group mates but that the departure of multiple individuals causes a greater escape response in the non-vigilant individuals. 3. If one group member departs, it might have done so for a number of reasons that have little to do with predation threat. 4. If non-vigilant animals escaped each time a single member left the group, they would frequently respond when there was no predator, a false alarm. 5. On the other hand, when several individuals depart the group at the same time, a true threat is much more likely to be present. Mobilities in transit offer a broad field to be explored by different disciplines in all faculties, in addition to the humanities. In spite of increasing acceleration, for example in traveling through geographical or virtual space, our body becomes more and more a passive non-moving container, which is transported by artifacts or loaded up with inner feelings of being mobile in the so-called information society. Technical mobilities turn human beings into some kind of terminal creatures, who spend most of their time at rest and who need to participate in sports in order to balance their daily disproportion of motion and rest. Have we come closer to Aristotle's image of God as the immobile mover, when elites exercise their power to move money, things and people, while they themselves do not need to move at all? Others, at the bottom of this power, are victims of mobility-structured social exclusion. They cannot decide how and where to move, but are just moved around or locked out or even locked in without either the right to move or the right to stay. Once an event is noticed, an onlooker must decide if it is truly an emergency. Emergencies are not always clearly labeled as such. Smoke pouring into a waiting room may be caused by fire, or it may merely indicate a leak in a steam pipe. Screams in the street may signal an attack or a family quarrel. A man lying in a doorway may be having a coronary, or he may simply be sleeping off a drunk. A person trying to interpret a situation often looks at those around him to see how he should react. If everyone else is calm and indifferent, he will tend to remain so. If everyone else is reacting strongly, he is likely to become alert. This tendency is not merely blind conformity. Ordinarily, we derive much valuable information about new situations from how others around us behave. It's a rare traveler who, in picking a roadside restaurant, chooses to stop at one where no other cars appear in the parking lot. But occasionally, the reactions of others provide accurate information. The studied nonchalance of patients in a dentist's waiting room is a poor indication of their inner anxiety. It is considered embarrassing to lose your cool in public. In a potentially acute situation, then, everyone present will appear more unconcerned than he is in fact. A crowd can thus force inaction on its members by implying, through its passivity, that an event is not an emergency. Any individual in such a crowd fears that he may appear a fool if he behaves as though it were.